Okay, good evening, everybody. Sego ani and buju endio wachea kwe kwe. As the mayor of the city of Kingston, I offer these words in the spirit of this gathering. Let us bring our good minds and hearts together as one to honor and celebrate these traditional lands as a gathering place of the original peoples and their ancestors who were entrusted to care for Mother Earth since time immemorial. It is with deep humility that we acknowledge and offer our gratitude for their contributions to this community, having respect for all as we share the space now and walk side by side into the future. So good evening, everyone. We were just meeting Committee of the Whole closed meeting. We did discuss one item with respect to 11 Wright Crescent market housing construction timelines. So I will ask for a motion to rise without reporting, please.
Moved by Councillor Oosterhoff, seconded by Councillor Boehm. The Council rise from the Committee of the Whole closed meeting without reporting.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, next we'll move to the approval of the addends. So there are 4 addends for tonight's meeting. The first includes an information report about proposed amendments to the Kingston Economic Development Corporation corporate bylaw. The second addendum is the addition of a report from Planning Committee. And then the third and fourth addendum include some communications and a list of 7 delegations for the meeting tonight. So the first thing that I will ask is for an approval of all of those added together. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on. Are there any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none, we have no presentations this evening, and so at this point we will move to delegations. I'm sorry, Councillor Hutchison, did you have a disclosure of pecuniary interest?
I don't, but I have a question about delegations. I just wanted to know if the delegation from, let's see.
So, Councillor Hutchison, I'm gonna read through the delegations, and then you'll.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to be sure you did that, and then I'll add it if I need to. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So, just referring to addend number 3, we have initial 3 delegations from Bob Clark, Alan Giacomin, and Leslie Rudy. And then at that point, we have several motions to add additional delegations. Those delegations are Elvira Schmidt, Maben Armstrong, Mary Ferrar, and Laurel Claus Johnson. Okay, so what we'll do is we will have the first 3 delegations, then I will pause and I will ask for the motions of council to waive our procedural bylaw to allow the addition of the delegations. So at this point, first we will invite Bob Clark, who will appear before council to speak to clause 4 of report number 40 received from the CAO with respect to the update on Kingston Inner Harbor Contaminated Sediment Management Project. Just a reminder to all of our delegations this evening that you have 5 minutes to speak, at which time then we will open up the floor to questions from council. Mr. Clark, welcome, and you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. This is very different for sure. For me, very first time, but I would like to thank the esteemed mayor, and you're doing a great job, and all you councillors for your very hard work. We definitely appreciate it, and we appreciate the time you put into this. Talking about the Inner Harbor sediment remediation project, there's a number of issues that, as this has come to light, that we as Metalcraft Marine are very concerned about. I sent out a mailer earlier today. I'm not sure if you received it or not, but the first thing that's noticeable, if you look back at the previous studies, the remediation area only partially matches up with the remediation area noted in the report put out by the city. We have gone back and forth with Transport Canada asking for more information. They are not providing that. We'd like to know what is the origination of this? Who is the minister involved? What's going on here? Because we were never involved as a stakeholder at all. And what they're saying is, oh, wait till the summer, you'll be a stakeholder in the summer. But one of the things that worries me is they telephoned, they did not email, and said, we will not be renewing your water lot lease as of 2023. It's currently up for renewal as of April 2020. They didn't renew it. They contacted us and said, we will renew it, but only to April 2023, at which time we're going to be doing X works and you won't have a water lot, which means our marina will be out of business and Metalcraft could be out of business. We've asked and asked repeatedly, what does this mean? Because it sounds to me like they think this is a done deal and they're having the consultation process this summer to hear what people have to say when it appears to me that they're planning on going ahead anyway. I think this is a terrible misuse of public funds. Everything I've read suggests that dredging will cause more environmental damage and bring the mercury, chromiums, and PCBs to the surface. So in the packet I submitted are the maps that don't match up and line up with the ones that the city provided us in the report and to you. And a number of things about PCBs as they're dropping in the Great Lakes substantially. You know, nature has a means to heal, and it has done a remarkable job so far. The reduction in PCBs in fish across the Great Lakes is substantial as of the last report that I included, which was 2005, and it continues. So I sincerely think that the city should dissuade Transport Canada from moving ahead on this until you and us have the information. We do not have the information. The report referred to in the report issued by Mr. McClatchy refers to an RMC report, doesn't give the number of the report. The report number, which took me a long time to find, is RMC CCC ES 14038. It's not public. It's not public information. They're withholding information that you should have, we should have, and the public should have. And I think that the city should demand that these people come up front. I am very mistrustful of Transport Canada, and I think that they are doing things behind our back without including and without being public. That's where I stand on it.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Okay, Councillor Field.
Just quickly, have you had an opportunity to speak to our MP on this issue? If not, I'd strongly suggest that you do so because you're an important business here in Kingston.
I contacted Mark. I got no response. I recontacted his office today. I recontacted Mark's office today and said, this is very important.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Patterson. I just want to commend Bob too for speaking to us tonight, and certainly want to recognize your business, and it's an important one for the city and for the work that you do. And hopefully this can work out, and we can certainly come alongside of you. And I think we ought to do that, and hopefully good can happen. Thank you.
So just a reminder,
Thank
it's
you very much.
questions from council.
The question I really meant to ask Mayor Patterson was, are you already looking for an alternate location? Is that something that you are forced to do because of timelines? Is I'm allowed to ask that? I think he's frozen.
Mr. Clark, are you still there?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry. Were you asking me the question, sir?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Clark. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, so is that a concern for you? Is that if you were given timelines, like is there actually another location that is available to you locally?
No, absolutely not.
No. Wow.
No, if you recall, when they were looking at putting the K-Rock at our location, the city provided 14 locations, none of which were feasible.
Right. So we recognize. Thank you for that information.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Rosen.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, just 2 questions for Mr. Clark. Thanks for sending us all those details today. Definitely very alarming to read about that. In the letter from Transport Canada, did they say that they would compensate Meadowcraft Marine for the inconvenience it's going to cost come April 2023?
Councillor Sanich, that's a very interesting question, because when I was reviewing all the documentation as this came to light with the city report, what I discovered was it was a phone call. They phoned us. It is not in writing that they are not planning to renew. And I have emailed them saying, I would like that in writing, because it's inappropriate, if you think about it, for a government agency to say, I'm not going to renew a lease that your business depends on and do it by a phone call. Come on, that's not right. So I've requested of this, so we know what minister to go to. I mean, many of the reports suggest it's Transport Canada and Parks Canada. Transport Canada guys, I repeatedly complained.
I believe that we're having some connectivity issues with.
Ask, will you please enforce this? Because they are dumping raw sewage into the river that people use, and they will not do a thing. That I have in writing. They will not do a thing.
Councillor Senek?
Thank you. And my second question is, in the phone call then, did they say for how long? Like it would start April 2023. Did they give an end date, or is it just indefinite?
No, they just said they would not renew the lease.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Mr. Clark. With that, we will move to our second delegation this evening. Mr. G. Coleman will appear before council to speak to clause 4 of report number 40 received from the CAO with respect to update on the Kingston Inner Harbor contaminated sediment management project.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson and councillors. I really appreciate the good work you guys do. I enjoy a nice life in Kingston, largely thanks to your good work, so I appreciate that. I saw on the TV recently a suggestion that you might be able to dredge your way out of a contaminated sediment problem without creating a catastrophe in a river. And so I thought I might have that wrong, so I looked into it, and that's why I ended up learning about delegations to the City Council, and that's why I'm here to speak to you today. I'm editor-in-chief of Physics of Fluids, the world's largest journal on flows, including the ones at issue, flows such as the ones at issue in this case. I'm a professor of chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, and physics at Queen's University, where I hold a Canada Research Chair, a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair. And this report that I've read, 21-107, it rests on 3 pillars, but the most troublesome one is the one on dredging. If you dredge the sediment left behind by a tannery, the sediment that nature has taken care of has immobilized in a paste-like substance that has a yield stress that doesn't deform, it doesn't displace. You will resuspend that into the water of the river, and that's not just going to create a problem on the day of the dredging. This is going to continue for years to come. What nature has taken years to pack away at the bottom of that river in a special form is going to be disrupted, and it's going to be like starting over again. It's like reopening the tannery. Now, I agree with Mr. Clark that report is, at least has been unavailable to me. I've been unable to find this 1,000-page report, but I did find the executive summary of that report, and I mentioned the 3 pillars. this report to council is about, first of all, is about revetment, but I can find no mention of revetment in the executive summary of that report, upon which, you know, report number 21-107 relies. Secondly, the executive summary of that 10-year-old report says plainly that capping is a bad idea and excludes it as a possible solution. And then finally, it does recommend dredging, but on the basis that, and I think the words are that the public is least likely to object to it, which is not science. So the worst possibility here of resuspending toxic chemical waste from a tannery into water that doesn't have a problem. The report comes to the conclusion the water is fine, you see, is a bad idea, especially when your city is and the inner harbor is flowing towards the Thousand Islands area. I mean, we have friends and relatives in Brockville who will be affected by this. And I'm not just talking about wildlife at the bottom of the river there. We're going to put this cloud of toxic chemicals back into play and send it down the river. So I'm concerned. I'm an expert on matters of flow and the physics of flow. There is the expected outcome of dredging toxic, sedimented toxic waste here is catastrophic. And the proper course of action here is to do nothing at all, to let nature stand on what Bob called healing, the healing process of sedimentation. Now, Mayor Patterson, I've paid no attention to my time, so but I'm told you'll tell me.
I will. You've got 30 seconds left.
There we go. So that paste-like substance is relatively harmless. If we resuspend that into the river, and there's no dredging method that I know of that's not going to do that, we're going to create a problem that we will have to live with for years to come. If I was a councillor, I would vote against this recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Sanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, thank you so much, Dr. Giacomin, for speaking to us tonight. You are definitely the expert. One thing I've heard going into tonight is that, you know, there's some people that are feeling that the fact that there's that expression, nature has a way to heal. Some people are saying that's just not true. You still have to remove it. So you reiterated that that is unsafe, right? So is it, so if we hear that as opposition as to why we should support this, you know, this plan for Transport Canada to dredge, we can say no. So when it's not true, I'm just trying to get confirmation that basically nature does have a way to heal. We can be confident nature does have a way to heal because the sediments are down paste-like, and
Councillor Sanek, so can I just,
science is.
So the question is, Professor, did you hear the question?
I do understand the question, and I would argue that healing process, which took decades, has completed.
Okay.
That those toxic chemicals are there, but they are immobilized in a paste-like substance that doesn't go anywhere. It's where it belongs. It's not touching our fishes. You see, as soon as we resuspend that cloud, what I mean by catastrophe is not just where it's headed, but fishes are mobile. The ones in front of Old Front Road out by the airport will be affected by this. The economic damage that will do to all the fishes as that moves down the river, through the inner harbor, and then down through the Thousand Islands is the sort of thing we haven't seen since we had tanneries dumping stuff into the inner harbor. This is the expected outcome here from the fluid mechanics is catastrophic.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, hopefully I get this better, is I heard another argument that, yeah, so along the river right now, we do have turtles and there are fish, but they're not in a good state, that the wildlife would thrive even more if we got rid of these contaminants. But that's not true either, is it? Because it's buried down.
That's not true. The environment is going to take a hit here. When you resuspend toxic chemicals, there's going to be a major hit to, now again, I'm not an expert on which species can withstand a big hit. This is kind of legacy information in chemical engineering about in the old days when tanneries just dumped stuff into that inner harbor. But the point is that we're going to expose all the species to the toxic chemicals that are sitting dormant, that are sitting harmlessly and dormant at the bottom of the inner harbor right now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Next is Deputy Mayor Hill.
Thank you, Professor. Just a couple questions. One of them is, given I would assume it's a significant expense to do this work that the federal government is proposing. Why do you think that they would, given what you said to us tonight, why do you think that they would entertain this kind of work if it's so costly to them and it only has the effect of damaging the environment?
Councillor Hill, your guess is as good as mine. All I can say is the motivation for this is not scientific, and it could be extremely damaging to the inner harbor, to the Cataraqui region, and to the Thousand Islands. This is not what you do to sedimented tannery waste, and I can't explain. It's also if you look at the executive summary of this 1,000-page report, which I can't get a hold of, I got a hold of the summary, but it's not saying that dredging is without its risks either. Mm-hmm. So look no further than the executive summary of the report upon which this report to City Council is based. That will keep you up tonight.
So do you believe that it's predicated on old science, or it's just not predicated on science at all?
It's not predicated on science at all. I mean, the comments about capping, for instance, are correct. For instance, if capping, of course, is just dumping into the river. If you dump sand on top of this problem, then you will change it. You will mix the sedimented toxic material with sand and then release it from the surface, because you will break its yield stress, you see? And furthermore, you will make the water shallower where you dumped it, and that accelerates the water as it flows over it, and then will ablate the material, carrying it further downstream and of course resuspending the toxic stuff. But the report states plainly, don't cap it. You see? The report says, go ahead and dredge it, but for the oddest reason. It says explicitly, because that's the method the public is least likely to object to, understandably, right? The people, the uninitiated, when they hear of dredging as a solution to toxic sediment, they think removing it is a good idea, just as if it was in your bathtub. Of course you would take it out, but in fact, nature doesn't sit idly by with this stuff. It has survived the pollution and then sedimented it down to the bottom of the inner harbor. If we raise that back up again, and I guess I'm repeating myself here, but it's going to resuspend it just like the days when the tannery was dumping it into the inner harbor, you see, on a daily basis. And that disruption, that breaking of the paste at the bottom, it doesn't just recover overnight. It's going to take years for that to recover in the meantime, this toxic cloud is going to continue to replenish itself and send the cloud on down the river. Another interesting thing about river flows is they're not one directional. So in the inner harbor area, it's also going to flow upstream. You see, we call these secondary flows, but this is going to affect the wildlife upstream of the inner harbor as well. And of course, everything that swims goes everywhere. So once that gets into the fishes, then it will affect the fishes in front of my property, for instance, on Old Front Road. I'm concerned.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate your comments.
Next on my list is Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. I guess my question was answered through Councillor Hill as well, but the one context, which I really appreciated all the questions, and certainly our speaker, Jeffrey, thank you for being here. Very, very helpful, especially on the, do we know that this could have international implications then as well? Like what stop signs can we raise besides engaging our federal MP, both in the rural area and in the Kingston and the islands, and all the way down through Eastern Ontario, but also we have international implications, do we not?
We do. That's correct. I mean, I only had 5 minutes, but thank you, Councillor Oosterhoff. Our neighbors to the north need to be warned. If we're going to start dredging up tannery waste in Kingston, we need to warn Brockville, and we're going to, like, even the report 10 years ago said our water was fine. That doesn't surprise me as a chemical engineer. The toxic chemicals are where they belong, at the bottom, you see? But once you resuspend them, that's another matter. And so the drinking water in Brockville is going to be a problem, and further on down the line. And the thing about this cloud is it moves undiluted. You sometimes hear expressions like the solution to pollution is dilution, but river flow doesn't work that way. It kills everything in its path. It's called a fish kill, you see? So this is going to wind its way around the Thousand Islands, and it will affect our friends in the United States as well.
Thank you for that. It's very important to know. Thank you.
Next is Councillor Neal.
Thank you. In the mid or late 90s, I was on council for a period, and I remember there was the plan to put in a waste management from Kingston to Ravensview. And originally, if my memory serves me well, that was intended to go under. And our environmental engineer of the day said, no, we shouldn't disturb that capped area, and we should find a way to put it above, which in fact we did. So is this, how has that notion altered from then till now?
So I'm afraid I'm not sure. Was that a river where you were capping, or?
It was to connect our waste management from the Kingston side across the river to connect with Ravensview in what was then Pittsburgh Township. And the recommendation originally was to bury the waste management effort, but instead our engineer suggested that we not do minimal damage to what is on top, the cap, and that we needed to carefully put it across the river, which I understand is what we did.
So somehow you're saying they found a way to dredge a capped problem without resuspending it?
They didn't. I don't believe they did any dredging. I believe that they found a way to lay the connection on the top of the, with minimal impact on the,
So capping is a pond process, not a river process. So I'm not quite sure about your example, but if there was no flow, then putting sand on top of a problem is not a bad idea. In a river, however, you make the riverbed shallower right where you wouldn't want it to be shallow. And then the water to flow over it, because water holds its own level. So to flow over the shallow areas, it has to accelerate. When water accelerates, it shears the bottom at a higher stress, which is going to ablate the bottom, now mixed with sand. So when you dump the sand on top of this sedimented toxic waste, you're going to mix the toxic waste with sand and break its yield stress. It no longer behaves as a paste. And then you're subjecting it to a higher shear stress on the surface. It's going to carry it further downstream and, of course, resuspend the toxic chemicals. So I'm not familiar with the particular example you're raising, Councillor Neal, but
I'll get information to share with you from Public Utilities, from Jim Keach. I'm sure
thank you.
we can get that answered. My final question is just a follow-up to Councillor Oosterhoff. If dredging takes place, does it put Canada and potentially the city in some jeopardy? Because I know we have an international treaty with the United States to protect our waterways, particularly the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway. Will that put us, in your estimation, at some jeopardy?
I'm afraid I'm not an expert at all on the laws of flow in the Great Lakes. What I do know is that the more I learn about these, the more remarkable I find the recovery of the Great Lakes has been over the past few decades. And largely because of this cooperation between the two countries, right? It doesn't work unless both sides do their part, and that's what's been going on for decades now. What we enjoy here is, I think, an example for the world of two very different nations cooperating on this one thing and making it better for us, year after year, and so decade after decade. Yeah, it's remarkable. So I'm not sure I'm the right one to answer your question, Councillor Neal, because that's I think a legal question, but I have relatives in Brockville, and I would worry about their health if we dredged that. I'm not worried about our health at all in Kingston, and the report, the 1,000-page report, I should say the executive's summary to the 1,000-page report that we're all talking about, but we don't have access to, pretty much says so, that the water is fine. That at least 10 years ago, when they tested the water, it was fine, and my guess is it's even better today. So,
Okay,
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much.
Next is Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. Professor Jackelman, welcome, and thank you for your comments so far. I'm going to ask you, because clearly you're quite an accomplished scientist. You've read the executive summary, and we're now discussing an action plan by the feds as a result of it. And I would say, you're saying it's not, you said already it was not based on, it doesn't appear to be based on science. So I would say, when you read the executive summary and objectively analyzed what was in it, is the conclusion in the executive summary, if not scientific, is it at least logical? And if so, what is the logic that it is based on?
I don't think it made sense even on its own terms to me, Councillor Stroud. Like, of course, as I mentioned, there's no mention of revetment. But it got the capping problem right. That was a scientific exclusion. They said, well, capping is not a good idea, you see? And then the reasoning, but at the front end of the report, they do talk about doing nothing at all. But when you go down to the part where they've decided the best thing to do is dredging, they don't compare that to doing nothing at all. That comparison wasn't made, at least in the executive summary. Instead, they say, this is the method to which the public is least likely to object, which that's the part. I didn't mean none of it was scientific. I just meant that the central decision that concerned me about this in the first place is supported by that argument, a very strange argument. And I'm not an expert on politics, but that's 10 years ago. And I don't think that would be true today. I think people would object to this, but I'm not an expert on that. I'm an expert on fluid flow.
Thank you. My second question, yes, and I think people are objecting to it today, as you just suggested. I guess let me just ask you whether you think it's possible that what you've read in that executive summary, and also considering the fact that it wasn't made public, is it possible that this report was written, as we say, backwards? As in, the authors of the report perhaps had an outcome in mind and just needed to put something together.
I'm a little bit concerned about that question and putting the delegation in, I think, a difficult position that he would have to speak to motives. So I think I would rule that question out of order.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll ask a different question.
And I'm not really, I was going to say I'm not really an expert on that kind of conjecture either. But anyways, right. Sorry, Mayor Pattison. I think I've answered a question I shouldn't have. Sorry about that.
Okay, Councillor Stroud, I'll give you another second question if you have one. Yes.
So could you simply would you sum up the report, the executive summary of the report that you read, as being? Does it purport itself to be a scientific report, and you just find it to be unscientific, or is it simply just not written as a piece of scientific analysis?
As I understand it, there's 1,000 pages of that report I haven't seen. I could digest those in an afternoon, no problem, but I haven't seen them, and I have tried to get them. I haven't succeeded in getting them. So, you know, it's hard to judge a book by its cover. That being said, all I can get a hold of is the executive summary. I studied that very carefully today. And when I came to the part that I was concerned about, I was kind of stunned to see that the justification for going ahead with dredging was not scientific. It was something else that I don't understand. Yeah.
Thank you.
Next is Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. Right now, I believe you said the water was safe, and I know that I've gone swimming with my kids in the lake and in the river at various times. If we were to dredge this, would any Kingstonian be able to go swimming at any time during the dredging?
I'm glad you bring that up, because this means a lot to me. Every summer morning, I walk to the water's edge. I dive in. I swim in Lake Ontario on the west end here every morning, and in the summer, right through till November, actually. And I won't be able to do that anymore. For years to come, until this resediments, we're not going to be able to swim in the water or put young children in the water. This is what I mean by catastrophic. It's not just going to kill the fishes, it's going to harm people.
Thank you. And that was actually my second question. The healing, you say, is done now. But if we were to disturb it and actually dredged it. You said years before this is healed again. Are we talking like decades, or are we talking like 1 or 2 years?
That depends on the details of the dredging. So I'm afraid I can't answer that exactly, but this is going to take years. I don't know about decades, but we're going to have to monitor the water until it's safe again. This is the kind of calamity that dredging sedimented toxic chemicals from the tannery industry is going to create.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next is Councillor Schmidt.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question is, Dr. Geoment. I prefer.
It's actually pronounced Giacomin. It's a Northern Italian name.
Okay, so Dr. Giacomin, listen, I sincerely appreciate your candor and approach tonight. I actually did some research in university under water toxicology myself, and for my undergrad. And one of the things that I find interesting about your presentation tonight, I have 2 questions for you. One, have you ever presented before City Council today, before tonight? And if you have not, what was the compelling reason to have you present? Like, what was your concern that drove you to speak out publicly on this very concerning issue?
Well, the television broadcast that I happened to see a few days ago had a person named Mary interviewed first, who seemed to have good instincts about dredging. So that struck me first. Then there was a person, I think it must be Mr. Clark, who was interviewed about the economic repercussions of dredging the inner harbor. And then since then, I've done my own research on the subject, and I learned about delegations to City Hall. So the answer to your first question is no, I've never spoken to City Hall before. Shame on me for not being more publicly involved, but I never miss an opportunity to vote. So in any event, this is the first time I've been motivated to do anything at all like this. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, next is Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Giacomin. I'd like to go back to you. You already mentioned that we will not be able to swim in our water anymore. So I'm thinking about drinking and fishing as well. So there are 2 other things we won't be able to do anymore: swim, drink, and fish all together. But I'd like to focus on drinking water. As council, we're actually legally responsible for the drinking water, the safety of our drinking water. But what I'm also hearing is that we should also be then concerned for the drinking water, perhaps of people in Brockville and perhaps further on. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the quality or the dangers to our drinking water and how far up or down and across stream it may go, because you say it's multi-directional as well.
I cannot. I know that I know that river flows are not one directional, and they flow upstream along the edges a lot. And of course, fish travel. They have a mind of their own. They're migratory, and they travel. So they get sick, and then they take those heavy metals with them. But if you look at the kinds of chemicals, the heavy metals that tanneries produce and that are immobilized in that sedimented material, you're not going to swim in in a place that has resuspended that material. Not if you're a chemical engineer. And I guess the thing is, we're going to have to warn the public, and it's not just like we're going to close the beaches for a day. That's not what we're talking about here. This is a much bigger calamity than that.
And I guess my second question is, so that's for the swimming and the fishing, but the drinking water, the contaminants may be taken out, or that could be also like, perhaps we don't even have the equipment to really extract those contaminants either. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct. I'm pretty sure our water intake system, again, is not designed to filter out heavy metals from the water. That's not what it does. We bring in good, clean water, and then of course, we filter it. But no, we're not. You can't use water with toxic chemicals in it as a feed source for Kingston drinking water. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps from what you say, we know the answers, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. In a couple of major projects by the city, we've used technology like silk curtains and the like to mitigate the flow of silt that is disturbed by whatever it is we're doing, okay? So do you think in a piecemeal fashion that kind of technology will allow us to do the work that is being proposed?
So there is no engineering solution. You can't dredge a river and prevent the cloud. You're not going. That's not possible. But silt curtains are used around construction projects, and they effectively, not completely, but they effectively prevent the silt from activity, from construction, to get away from the construction site. But if we turn our attention to revetment, for instance, when we put big stones together by the waterfront, we create crevices between them, and then the water pressure, first of all, from wave action, reaches between the stones, between the large stones, and then you can see, for instance, over at the time sculpture, you can see the gravel behind it being shot up towards the sculpture, maybe 20 feet behind the stones. Gives you some sense of the water pressure that is channeled between the revetment pieces. And then, of course, you'll see the gravel that has been placed behind those stones sinking downward, and that's because the silt, the soil underneath that gravel is being taken away into Lake Ontario. In other words, our revetment structures are silting Lake Ontario, and they're high maintenance in the sense that we need to replenish that material behind them. So it's a continuous source of silting. But there's no way to combine the ideas, Councillor Hutchinson. There's no way to take those curtains and somehow use them in the water when you're dredging. The disruption of toxic sediment cannot be done safely.
Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions at this time. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Mr. Jackman. Appreciate that. And with that, we'll move to our next delegation this evening. Leslie Rudy will appear before council again to speak to clause 4 from report number 40 from the CAO with respect to the Kingston Inner Harbor Contaminated Sediment Management Project. Ms. Rudy, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me here tonight. I'll be brief because I think most of my concerns have been and will be addressed by other delegations. I'm a member of several environmental and nature-based organizations here in Kingston, and as some of you will know, I am also currently researching turtles in the Inner Harbor as we speak. So I know Maben Armstrong from Turtles Kingston is here, and hopefully you will approve her addendum and she will speak more to the biology of turtles, but I can just confirm that definitely there are turtles there, and I cannot see any way that they would not be affected by dredging, shoreline revetment, and other proposed projects. Also, I just want to thank actually the City of Kingston for the support of my turtle project. That's been wonderful. I also would like to point out it's not just turtles. There's lots of other wildlife there. If you've had a chance to be down in the Inner Harbor, you'll know that beavers are catching a lot of attention lately. There's osprey, tons of waterfowl, all sorts of things. And again, I have trouble envisioning how they wouldn't be seriously impacted by these kind of activities. But the main thing that I wanted to speak to is something that both the previous delegations have spoken to is sort of the lack of information so far. Is that this report that suggests that these activities are needed is not available. We haven't been able to look at it. It's hard to comment on it, and I would suggest that the city can't really support something even in principle if we don't know what it is that we're supporting. I would like to see at least, I realize that the federal government is in the early stages of doing their planning. However, even at this early stage, we should have some information on things like the goals of the project in terms of reference, what the priorities are. I understand, I just learned from the field naturalists earlier this evening that the Parks Canada's Rideau Canal plan is under review, and there's a new draft that prioritizes recreation. So I wonder if that's one of the reasons for this, rather than wildlife or other concerns being prioritized. So that's really all that I wanted to say, is that I'm concerned about wildlife, but it's also very hard to comment on what I should be concerned about exactly when we don't have access to information. And I do think that we as a city need to push for that and to delay any support until we have all the information that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Reed. With that, we will move to further delegations. So here I will ask for motions from council to waive our procedural bylaws to add additional delegations beyond the 3 that are permitted under our bylaws. So first, moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Hill, that we waive our procedural bylaw to allow Elvira Schmidt to speak to, again, clause 4, report number 40. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Next, moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Hill, to waive our clauses of our procedural bylaw to allow Maben Armstrong to speak to clause 4 of report number 40. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Next, moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor McLaren, to waive our procedural bylaw to allow Mary Ferrar to speak to clause 4 of report number 40. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. And then finally, moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Osanek, that clauses of our procedural bylaw be waived in order to allow Laurel Claus Johnson to speak to clause 4 of report number 40. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Okay, so with that, we will move to delegation number 4. We will invite Elvira Schmidt to speak to council. Welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Thank you, councillors, for all your work. And also thank you for giving me the opportunity to voice my perspective here on the Kingston Inner Harbor Contaminated Sediment Management Project. I'm speaking as a Kingston resident, a trained horticulturist, and a current PhD candidate in cultural studies at Queen's University. And I'm also, I've been teaching in a university context as a visiting professor, and I'm currently teaching online as a sessional faculty at Emily Carr University in Vancouver, a class on environmental ethics. So as a Kingston community member, I regularly enjoy the Cataraqui waterfront for recreation purposes. And what struck me early on was the amount of wildlife along the shoreline and on the former Davies Tannery lot. So I've seen the beavers at work, turtles and birds, and I was enchanted, or I'm enchanted by the biodiversity that I encounter there, so close to the city. So when I learned the city is planning to dredge a highly contaminated sediment along the shoreline, I must say I have become deeply concerned, and even more so after hearing Professors Giacomin's deliberations. And I understand, as he said, for the past decades, a natural remediation process of parts of the contaminated site has unfolded. And that resulted in the toxins in the water being sedimented on the river floor. And as we have heard, the water itself has been cleared from the toxins in the process. And again, I'm concerned that steering up these highly toxic contaminants through dredging will cause serious problems for the environment, the water, the animals who have made their home there, and the plants that grow there, and plants who do their remediation work, right? And I'm referring to this research paper by Mannion, Campbell, and Rudder here. It might represent a threat to the non-human inhabitants and may lead to further habitat loss, which in my opinion, we cannot afford in times of mass extinction of species. And even under the best precaution measures which I'm sure you are planning to take, I understand that there is no guarantee that stirred up toxins do not seep back into Cataraqui River, a water body that is connected to the St. Lawrence River and the lake, as we have heard. And we are getting our drinking water from the lake. So I would also be highly concerned about, obviously, about our health. So from an environmental ethics perspective, we would not only ask what is our interest, the human interest in the matter, but what is the perspective and interest of the plants, animals, and the land in general, or the river, for example. And in the past, we have prioritized the human perspective when it comes to practices that might have a major impact on nature. But current philosophical discussions emphasize the importance of recognizing our non-human neighbors, recognizing the land, the water as kin. So we are not relating to nature as a resource that doesn't have or doesn't possess agency, but we understand that we are in an intrinsic relationship with the living world around us that is intelligent and self-sustaining, and that does possess agency. Robin Wall-Kimmerer, professor for environmental and forest biology at State University in New York, talks about a practice of respectful reciprocity that has been significant to indigenous ways of being in the world for millennia, a philosophy from which I think I can learn a lot, or maybe we can learn a lot. So in our case, it would mean maybe to consider extending the concept of community to our non-human fellow beings.
30 seconds.
And include nature's perspective on the matter of remediation. So, and there's actually a word for remediation. It's called bioremediation. And bioremediation is the management of contaminated sediments, for example, or some contaminated sites, which do not necessarily mean do nothing. Bioremediation means a non-destructive approach in healing the land in joint partnership with nature. And
thank you.
My other question I have, may I just pose what the other aspect that I'm not really sure about?
I'm sorry, ma'am, but just to be fair to all delegations,
okay.
Always have to restrict people to 5 minutes. However, we will open it up to questions and there could be additional discussion at that point. So at this point, I will ask, are there any questions from council? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Elvira, for your presentation. You give us a lot to think about, and so have the previous presentations. And we have asked a lot of questions, but so I'm just wondering what question you were just going to raise that we haven't maybe not thought of.
Myself is the one question is that bioremediation as a work with plants and mushrooms and bacteria is something that I feel I was wondering if this has been consulted and studied and included in any deliberations. And the other question that I have was that I'm asking myself, where is the heavily contaminated soil being shipped to? Does it mean that we transport contaminated soil into an area that is still healthy, or are we adding contamination to an already polluted area, and also take the risk of polluting trucks, tools, and so on? And not to speak of the negative impact if you remove clean soil from an ecologically functioning system by having machinery to bring that in, what that actually means. Where does the contaminated soil go to if it would be dredged?
Thank you very much. That's a good question. And we'll be asking that of staff later. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. I was going to ask some more questions on that bioregeneration you were referring to. So one of the things that was suggested previously was that we should probably do nothing. Are you suggesting that there's other things that we could do? And you mentioned something about mushrooms. Can you expand on that?
I know about the research, for example, by Laila Darwish, who is a bioremediation expert and environmental conservation scientist from Alberta, who actually suggests that, we work with nature in order to, and it's already happening, like disaster sites, oil spills and so on, are being remediated through so-called bioremediation with the help of plants, mushrooms, and bacteria. And I think that what I'm saying is I would wish that this could be studied more or taken into consideration more, or having experts invited for consultation.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, Ms. Schmidt, thank you very much. And now we will move to our 5th delegation. We will now invite Maben Armstrong to speak to council with respect to clause 4 from report number 40. Ms. Armstrong, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Mayor Pedersen, and I want to thank the city councillors for allowing me to express my concern. I would like to begin my delegation by reading a statement of concern submitted by Matt Keevil, who is a PhD candidate from the Department of Biology at Laurentian University. And he states, I'm a boreal ecology PhD candidate at Laurentian University with expertise focusing on the population ecology of freshwater turtles. And I have familiarity with Kingston Inner Harbor, which is the site of the proposed remediation project. In 2019, I assisted with field research focusing on turtles, including nesting surveys and VHF radio telemetry of northern map turtles with the Friends of Kingston Inner Harbor in partnership with Dr. Steve Lougheed's lab at Queen's University. Dredging poses a substantial direct mortality threat to turtles and other vertebrates. eastern musk turtles, northern map turtles, snapping turtles, and painted turtles have been observed in that area adjacent to the proposed surface sediment dredging areas. I'm concerned that the proposed dredging and capping procedures are targeting habitat areas that are used intensively by turtle species at risk without any documented assessment of the risks or benefits to these populations, and seemingly without consideration for how to mitigate potential direct mortality. Given the slow life history of these species, most with generation times approaching or exceeding 30 years, there's a high potential for long-lasting harm to these populations. The proposed dredging procedure should not proceed without serious and careful consideration of potential harms to sensitive population and ways to mitigate these risks. Sincerely, Matthew G. Keevil. My expression is habitat is paramount. I'm going to focus on northern map turtles. Northern map turtle is just one of the 4 species known to inhabit the Kingston Inner Harbor. They can be seen basking on emergent rocks and fallen trees along the water's edge throughout spring and summer. They are identified as a species at risk, along with the remaining 4 turtle species found in the Kingston area. In winter, the turtles hibernate on the bottom of the deep, slow-moving sections of the river. It is essential for their habitat to contain suitable basking sites, such as rocks and deadheads. The main reason for the decline in their population is habitat loss and degradation due to shoreline development and decline in water quality. The dredging initiative would severely jeopardize all of these concerns. Relocation of the species is not an option for their survivability. They are likely to succumb to disease transmission and parasites, and they will lack a natural immunity to their newfound location. There's also an issue of genetic mixing that will further compromise their survivability. In foreign territories, they can even become depressed and stop eating, resulting in their demise. Female northern map turtles, now this is really important, can take more than 10 years to reach maturity. They nest from June through July and generally lay a single clutch of 10 to 17 eggs, although map turtles in the Kingston Inner Harbor have been observed laying 2 clutches in a season. Less than 1% of those turtle eggs will survive to sexual maturity for a variety of reasons. Late maturity and the diminished survivability of their offspring translates to the reality that if their colony experiences any outside detrimental influence, in this situation, habitat destruction, shoreline degradation, and revived contaminants, the likelihood of the colony's recovery is next to nil. They simply will not be able to keep up with what is happening to their environment, to be able to replace themselves. The following is an excerpt from the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada that identified the northern map turtle as a species at risk. Populations of map turtles will likely not persist where major threats occur, whether it's recreational boating, shoreline habitat destruction, intense commercial fishing, illegal harvesting. In such late maturing species, even low rates of chronic increased mortality of adult females will cause these declines over the short term.
30 seconds.
And possibly extirpation of populations over the long term. Although northern map turtles are widespread and seemingly abundant, they need to be considered in the light of our shifting baseline, where each succeeding human generation perceives the current level of species abundance as the new norm, sometimes obscuring the reality that the historical numbers may actually have been much greater. Some authors suggest that freshwater turtle abundance today.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna have to stop you there.
Okay.
Sorry. I will appreciate that, and we'll certainly open up the floor to questions from council.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any questions from council? Okay. Seeing none. Thank you very much, Ms. Armstrong.
Thank you.
And with that, we will move to our next delegation this evening. We will invite Mary Ferrar to speak to council with respect to clause 4 of report number 40. Ms. Ferrar, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thanks so much. And thanks to all of you in council for, putting up with so many of us speaking and taking up such a lot of time at the beginning of council. I appreciate your patience. So I would like to take, I was going to say more, but a lot has been said already, and I'm very grateful that so many people have spoken from so many diverse points of view. My concern is with Transport Canada. Like, I know that many people have had problems with Transport Canada in the past, and there appears to be certainly a lack of transparency. In the Globe and Mail this morning, there was a piece about scientists and wanting to organize themselves for the Global Public Health Intelligence Network. And this is a result of 40 years of the federal government cutting back on scientists and replacing them with bureaucratic managers. And that's the kind of thing that it results in. And I'm concerned about the lack of scientists. I don't know the personalities involved, but it's certainly a potential possibility that it's more administrators these days in Transport Canada than it is actual scientists, just like Parks Canada moving in the direction of recreation rather than wildlife. I mean, I think we have to look at the broader picture and be very concerned about this. The lack of transparency in Transport Canada is quite disturbing. I mean, I've tried to find information. I don't get any replies. I've asked for a copy of the RFP, no. I mean, it seems like stonewalling. It seems lacking in transparency. And you won't believe how many people have said to me, who's behind this? Like, who's benefiting from this? Like, why is this happening? Because of the lack of transparency. So I think this is a problem. And another problem is the old data. I know personally that a study was done a couple of years ago. I know by accident because a young woman with SNC Lavalin went to the Kingston Historical Society and they referred her to me because she wanted maps of the shoreline of the Inner Harbor. So we went for a long walk all along the shoreline. And what she was up to was creating a weather station at the causeway and 4 black boxes underwater that would be submerged to look at the relationship between storm surges and pollution in the water. And I presume this report was published last year, and it's possible, I guess this was commissioned by Transport Canada, that it might be part of the basis that they're using for these suggestions. Now, I talked with Dave Lawrence, who is the person in procurement who's in charge of this file, and he said, oh, not to worry, that there will be public consultation in July and everything. Nothing much has really started already. But then when I saw the report, I was truly horrified by, my God, all of this dredging mapped out. It didn't look as though it was going to be an open process. It looked as though to me, as though the July thing was just going to be, oh, well, we compulsorily, whatever, have to inform the public, but really we've made the decisions and we're going to go ahead with it anyway. So this is deeply disturbing. And so I guess what I'm really worried about is, well, possible liability issues for the city, for one thing, with all of this stuff. But we don't know what the feds have done, what the research is. And I honestly believe with Leslie Rudy that, I think you, council, and us community members, we need to have a much better idea of exactly what Transport Canada is basing this on, what their plans are. We have no idea. And it's a real leap of faith. Like, do we trust Transport Canada or not? And that's your decision, really, as councillors. So that's all I have to say, basically. You were just going to tell me 30 seconds, I made it.
You beat me to it. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Okay, Councillor Chappelle.
I can never find my mouse, Your Worship. Mary, I want to thank you for all the diligence you have put forward in the Inner Harbor, but obviously you would have shared some of this information with your vast email list that you have. How many supportive emails did you receive for the idea of dredging the Inner Harbor?
No, I haven't, and I don't usually get emails in response. I mean, I do have 1,000 people on my mailing list. And I typically don't get responses, but I see people downtown. My son says to me, no one's ever going to read your emails, for God's sake. I mean, they're tomes. And yet I'm constantly interrupted by people downtown who say, I read it from beginning to end. It's the most informative. It's better than the wake. So it isn't really so much of a dialogue that we have, though. I can't say that, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Ms. Ferrar.
Thank you.
We will move to our seventh and final delegation this evening. We'll invite Ms. Laurel Claus Johnson to speak to council. Welcome, and you have the floor.
Okay, I got the floor. Okay. I cannot start my own. Okay, I see where the control is. Thank you for taking me at such a late date, and with the process that you have, I do respect that as a sign of respect to treat us all in that manner. My concerns that I bring forward today have to do with dredging. They also happen to relate to the former delegation that I had talked with the committee that was set aside to discuss this issue. And one of the questions I recall asking that was of concern to me is, what kind of neighbors are city councilors of Kingston? When they talk about picking and dredging and taking things up out of the land here and taking it somewhere else and putting it in somebody else's territory. So that was one of the concerns when I thought about what does dredging mean. It means unsettling and taking things and moving them. And so I'm a proponent of what I call the largest healing process that we all know of, that we barely acknowledge, which is called Mother Earth. And she's doing that now. She actually is doing what she needs to do to make that water safe, to make that place safe for fish and other water-bearing animals, and the things that live close to the water, like birds and all of those things that are growing now on the Tanner property. So my concern that I bring forward to you is not quite related to all the intricate and very formidable discussions on that type of dredging and what the results of it is. Mine is much more of a moral and a moral question about taking something out and putting it somewhere else that's contaminated. And also then, why is the respect not being given to what's already occurred in that area of the water by the Mother Earth herself, and how she heals herself and how she's made it so that people can swim there in the water. So, and animals can live there and turtles can breed there. So that's my concern with the bridge. That was all of it that I talked about with the trees. Brian, all of the things that I brought forward. Mine is very short and sweet, and it's very much to the point, and hopefully it hits your heart and your head at the same time, because I personally cannot understand why anybody would be doing what any of the things that are being discussed here. I can't see it for a reason of money. I can't see it for the reason of salvation or any kind of upper level improvement of lifestyle or anything like that. So somebody, I believe, is going to need to have city council come together and explain to the citizens such as myself, what is the reason for this? And that's my question then, Brian. And that's it, me, short and sweet. Now I go.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Okay, seeing none. Ms. Claus Johnson, thank you very much. And at this point, we will move on in our agenda. So thank you. So we have no further delegations this evening. We have no briefings. Are there any petitions to present? Okay, seeing none, we do have one motion of condolence. Moved by Mayor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that the sincere condolences of Kingston City Council be extended to the family of Raymond Garner, Director, Solid Waste Operations, on the passing of his mother, Denise Garner, on Thursday, March 25th, 2021, at the age of 76. Our thoughts are with Raymond and his family during this difficult time. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have no deferred motions, so we will now move on to reports. First up, we have report number 39 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Stroud, seconded by Councillor Oosterhoff, that report number 39 from the Chief Administrative Officer, consent, be received and adopted.
Okay, so there's just the one clause, unassumed laneway access and improvement agreement, 333 University Avenue. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report number 40 from the CAO.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Hill, seconded by Councillor Baum, that report number 40 from the Chief Administrative Officer, recommend, be received and adopted clause by clause.
Okay, so the first clause is capital project status report, fourth quarter 2020. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number 2, Chief Information Officer delegated authority for authorization of procuring software data licensing, maintenance, and support agreements. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Number 3, Creative Industries Profile Sector Report and Strategy. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a very positive and worthwhile initiative. We often think of the arts as a nice to have and forget how much the creative industry contributes to employment in our local economy. And I'm glad to hear and read that we're looking into space, because I know that's been an issue for artists, particularly during COVID. So my question is regarding independent artists. I know we're going to consult with key partners and stakeholders. And what about the independent artists? How are we including them and supporting them? Because they're often very entrepreneurial as well.
Okay.
Well,
oh, okay. Yes, Mr. Wigginton, go ahead.
thank you, and through you, your worship. One of the points that the report makes is that the emphasis is on working with different sectors and being able to work with creatives of all types to be able to support the commercialization and distribution and presentation of their work. So independent artists are very much a part of that. We are obviously in this initial work that's being proposed here focusing on 3 subsectors: film, theater, and music. But that certainly doesn't preclude us from working with other independent artists as key stakeholders in this work. And so as we move forward through this first phase of implementation, one of the first actions is to set up the Creative Industries Working Group. And that's going to be a key mechanism through which we'll be working with our key partners and then with members of the community to define the path going forward. So we're certainly hearing, especially as a result of COVID-19, the concerns of community members, and very much wanting to capture and reflect those concerns within this work that we're doing.
Great, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, we will call the vote then on clause 3. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to clause 4, update on Kingston Inner Harbor Contaminated Sediment Management Project. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. So I've heard a lot of detriments expressed recently on this. So I have a few questions for staff about some of the detriments that we may have heard recently. Concerning, say, the economic detriment, we heard from Middlecraft that they may go out of business out of this. Is there anything that we can do or that we know that the federal government will do to protect them or to help them bridge this gap during the time when this can't be done?
Okay, Commissioner Hugo, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor McLaren. And I have our Environment Director, Paul McClatchy, on the call, who may add some context to questions and probably lead the answering of questions. But in response to Councillor McLaren, so the federal government has not launched its public consultation process and stakeholder engagement, and they are scheduled to do that in July. So that would be the appropriate forum for stakeholders, business owners, and the public to be able to provide input into the federal project. The federal government will be running a consultation process for that input, and again, that would be the appropriate time.
May I ask, with regards to that consultation, are you aware of any time when the federal government has actually helped small businesses when they're when they tried to do something that is actually hurtful to them?
So Councilor McLaren, that's a pretty loaded.
I'm just trying to ask if anybody knows of any condition. I mean, we hear about big things like SLL, and do they help the small businesses, the ones that we are responsible for, or we're supposed to be protecting?
Mr. Hugo,
I can only answer with the information that the Transport Canada and then the partner agencies that are working on this project and the information they've given to us, Councillor McLaren. I'm not at liberty to talk about their past projects or how they have dealt with big or small companies, to be honest.
Okay. With regards to, say, a tourism impact here, I'm wondering, is there any mitigation that we can have? I mean, I can see that there'll be a lot less sailing, there'll be a lot less tours on the ocean or on the lake if there's no swimming. Do we have any estimates on anything that we can do to mitigate that?
So, Mr. McClatchy,
yeah,
I'm wondering if you want to address the tourism question, but I think there's also some pieces in Councillor McLaren's question. I'm wondering if you can address those as well.
Yeah, and I can't address them specifically, but as part of the federal government's proposed project, they do have to do what's known as a detailed impact assessment. And that's not just an assessment of environmental impacts that might occur because of their proposed projects, but it's an assessment of the economic and social and so forth types of impacts. So I would expect that impacts to local tourism would have to be addressed within that detailed impact assessment process.
Are you aware if they will also be considering food security? I know there's a lot of people who fish for pleasure and for food in the area, and any perhaps legal detriments that we might have as a result of, say, the water getting into our water supply, like one of those clouds that was described getting into our water supply and maybe hurting some people, because I understand that council is personally liable for that kind of stuff. Anything like that, like, will they also consider the fact that this is coming from Kingston when we deal with our neighbors, say both upstream and downstream? Is that kind of stuff that they're going to consider, or do we have to actually find that list of all the possible things that could go wrong and that we could be held accountable for?
Thanks for that. Well, two things. I'm not aware of the specific scope of their detailed impact assessment, but a detailed impact assessment would look at a broad range of potential impacts from the proposed project. And the second part of my answer, I'd say, is one of the reasons we're bringing this to council's attention this evening is to get to raise awareness of what the federal government is proposing to do, because that's important, obviously, and also to get council's endorsement for us to continue working with the federal government to ask those sorts of questions and potentially express those kinds of concerns.
I guess the last question I have is, how likely are they to actually listen to us? Because from what I've heard here, I'm very much against dredging. It seems like they're pretty much committed to that.
Yeah, I don't want to presuppose the motives of the federal government here, but they have approached us with a description, an early description of their project. They tell us that they're probably at about the 30% in their design stage. So there is still a lot of design work still to be done. Whether or not that includes as much or any of the dredging they're currently setting out so that they can have these early stakeholder consultations, I don't know. But they've asked us to participate in their project. So I'm going to take that at face value and assume that our concerns are going to be acknowledged and listened to.
Okay, if I may suggest, one of the things you might want to suggest to them, at least coming from me, perhaps council might have different opinions. No dredging, please.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson. So the question I have for Mr. McClatchy is related to, I'm just reading this again. So I guess I'm wondering, even Mayor Patterson, if we have two problems here. Do we have the area that is controlled by Transport Canada, and then we have areas where we have influence that are city-owned water lots? And so I guess that's my first question. Is that possible, Mr. McClatchy, that we actually have, probably they will hear us on what we own, but that they might go their own way on what they own? Could that actually be possible?
McClatchy?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Certainly the water lots that the city of Kingston owns, we have control over those. So we have the ability to say what can and cannot happen on those water lots. Notionally, one would think that if the federal government is completing a larger project, we would join in on that project, unless, as been discussed here, there are aspects of the federal approach that we couldn't abide. But again, important to say that this is a discussion we need to have with the federal government so that we can determine what these details are going forward and make decisions based on that.
Thank you. And the next question I have, Mayor Patterson, is related just to that. I really want to understand, and I really appreciate the conversations tonight. So, but we don't know yet that the government won't listen to us, right? So I want to make sure that, even though I don't think there's such a thing as an overreaction when it comes to compromising our water supply and the life of all the life involved here. So I 100% am on board with everyone here, but I do want to make sure that we have to have some faith in our government, that they have the best intentions here, and we will also guide them with what we know and with science. But I guess that's my question is, will we lose that opportunity if we don't execute this recommendation that council support in principle? Well, no, we may not support in principle the sediment cleanup, but we want to support engagement before we actually support it. Council and Mayor Patterson, does that make sense?
Sorry, I was just. Was that a question for me? Or?
Well, you and Mr. I just want to make sure how do we execute this tonight and do this right. We don't want to lose the engagement as stakeholders, and yet we may not want to be supportive initially on the sediment cleanup.
So I think probably it's best pitched to staff just to get their answer, and then we can.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Guggenboss.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor Patterson, and through you. Good question, Councillor Oosterhoff. And it is not staff's intention tonight to solidify an agreement or seek council direction that the city is bought into this project, or that we're contributing, or that we support the methodologies. That is not the intent. The intent is to seek council direction to collaborate with Transport Canada and their partners on what they are proposing to do and how it could benefit or not city water lots, and how the city could contribute to the project, but to bring all that information back to council for decision. It was not intended to be perceived or to be understood as this is the city supporting this project in exactly this way. As Environment Director Paul said, McClatchy, sorry, the feds have told us that they are about 30% to the design, and there is a lot of information that has been noted tonight and that we have noted that we have not seen. They are also scheduled to provide information and public and stakeholder consultation and a duty to consult with Indigenous peoples starting, they say, in July. So there is a lot of work to do, and the project wouldn't even begin until 2023 at the earliest. So a long way to go, but I just want to be clear. This is a federally driven project. This is something that they've approached city staff and other stakeholders in the area about, and that we are just seeking council direction to work with them so that we can bring back foundational information back to council for decisions. And there may need to be information in the interim, absolutely, before those decisions could be made.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I just have trouble supporting what that council support in principle. I would like to support engagement and a very influential engagement and consultation. So I'm not sure what to do with this.
Okay, thank you. Next is Deputy Mayor Hill.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. I do really agree with what Councillor Oosterhoff has said. It's sort of, and maybe it's just the way that I read this, but it does look as to me at first blush as though by endorsing it in the manner that is requested here, that it sounds like we're an enthusiastic supporter of it. Where I think what we really want to be is a really engaged participant, because we do have some real serious questions that were raised tonight about the science and about the process, and so certainly I think we want to be at the table. There's no question about that. So I wouldn't want to do anything that suggests otherwise, because it's going to be a very important discussion for us going forward. We want to make sure that it's based in good science, and I think Mr. McClatchy has already said that. There's a long way to go, and as has Commissioner Hugenboss, but it does sound as though in this report that we are kind of endorsing the plan forward, which includes dredging, which I think, as I'm hearing around the table, is probably not the case. So I'm wondering if we could actually refer this back to staff for maybe some reworking in terms of language, particularly about our concerns around the dredging, that should be clearly stated, and that, as I think Councillor Oosterhoff said, we're not endorsing this. We're endorsing the opportunity to be engaged in the process, but the plan itself we have some real serious concerns about. So I don't know if that, Mayor Patterson, does that require like a motion to defer it or refer it back to staff, or how would we proceed?
Thank you. So a motion to defer is certainly in order. What I will say is I know that there. My apologies. Okay, you guys can hear me now?
Yeah.
So to that end, I do know that there's a motion to defer that the next speaker on my list wants to put forward. So Councillor Hill, or Deputy Mayor Hill, with your permission, since you're asking that question, I think I'll just move on to the next speaker. So next on my list is Councillor Rosanek. Councillor Rosanek, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Exactly. Councillor Hill, Councillor Oosterhoff, you talked about how we kind of need more engagement right now before we know if we can do what the motion is asking us to do, which is to support this idea in principle. A lot of us were iffy going into tonight, and I think after we heard all the delegations tonight, we're even more iffy. We need some answers. Like, I need some answers. We read in the report, it could be municipal contribution, maybe some in kind, but it could be like $1 million to $2 million contribution with Transport Canada doing the rest. And I can't tonight say, yeah, I support that in principle without hearing other answers. Like we heard tonight that we could have our drinking water downstream in jeopardy, swimming, fishing. There's so many things that are up in the air. And so what I think we need a pre-consult before Transport Canada's plan of doing consultation later on, whether that starts in July or in 2023. I think we need a pre-consult now for them to actually listen. Like we don't even know tonight if any of them are listening to this council meeting, hearing the concerns that are already out there. We just don't know. And so I do want to propose a deferral, and if staff can put it up, and I'm looking for a seconder, if they could put the wording up.
Okay, so I did see a couple of hands volunteering for it to be a seconder. So let me just, Councilor Stanley, I'll just read it, and then you have the floor. So it says that that clause 4 of report number 40 received from the CAO be deferred until a special public meeting is hosted by the Environment, Infrastructure and Transportation Policies Committee, and that Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum and representatives from Transport Canada be invited to discuss the plan as Transport Canada knows it today for the Kingston Inner Harbour, including the effects on drinking water for human consumption, fish, and wildlife. Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Sanik, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Now, this is our first chance to put our new procedural bylaw into play. So just to remind council going home that the rules around a motion to defer is that you can speak for up to 1 minute with respect to time, place, or purpose. Councillor Sanik, you have the floor if there's anything else you'd like to know.
No, I think whatever answers we can get from this meeting will be great. And then staff could summarize what other questions we still have to ask for when it comes back to council at that time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Time, place, or purpose? Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Sanik, I'm wondering if you would consider adding a couple words about swimming in your deferral motion, because with the success of the pier and the water and the shorelines shuffle and the waterfront projects that we've had in the last 10 years, it would be a real shame if swimming quality was affected, as suggested by Professor Jackman. So I'm wondering if you could add a couple of words about swimming in your deferral.
So, Councillor Stroud, I'm just going to pause you there. Can we just see the motion to defer up one more time?
Like,
so Councillor Stroud, I'm just looking at the wording. So you'll see that the wording of the motion to defer is that they be invited to discuss their plan as they know it today, including the effects. So I don't see in this motion to defer a need to be exhaustive. I think it's certainly something that I'm sure that there's many other things and other concerns we've heard of. So I would be reluctant to have to spell out every one of those effects in the motion to defer. Again, because of the wording saying including, it's certainly not limiting to the effects that have been noted in the motion to defer.
Thank you for that ruling, but I'm really just asking if the mover would consider altering the wording slightly to include swimming.
So, Councillor Sanik.
Sure. So after human consumption, comma, we could put recreational swimming, and then comma, fish and wildlife.
So if that's acceptable to council, we'll include recreational swimming, but I am going to appeal to council that we not continue to add in specific concerns, because we don't want to miss anything. And I don't want to make this an exclusive piece that would tie the hands of EITP in having this discussion with the representative from Transport Canada. Okay, so that change has been noted. Any other discussion on the motion to defer? Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship.
We heard a lot of the staff presentations tonight talking about how this is a federal issue initiated by the federal government. So I'm wondering if it would be amenable to the mover to also include our local representative to present at that committee to get his perspective as a representative of our community in Ottawa at that meeting to understand what he understands the purpose of this whole project would be and how it would benefit or be a detriment to Kingston. I think inviting MP Garrettson also to this meeting to present would be very beneficial. And I'm wondering if you would be amenable to adding that to that delegation.
So, Councillor Spell, so I'm just going to jump in again. I'm just consulting with the clerks here. So once again, the motion to defer is not exclusive in terms of who else can be invited. So what it spells out that at the very minimum, yes, we would invite a member of Transport Canada. There's nothing that precludes us from extending that invitation, and the clerks have assured me that that invitation will take place.
Duly noted.
Thank you. Anybody else to time, place, or purpose? Councillor Holland.
First, a quick question on the procedural bylaw. Are questions allowed as part of the discussion on time, place, and purpose?
So the answer is yes. So questions are allowed. And as usual, when you ask a question, the moment that you're done speaking, then I stop the clock, to then allow staff to respond. So the only thing is that you only have 1 minute to play with instead of 5. So yes, questions are allowed.
Great, thank you. Quick one. For staff, I guess, so as we've heard a lot tonight about Transport Canada's involvement or notification or lack thereof. So I'm just wondering if, given the deferral, if this meeting is difficult to arrange, what would be the next step? Would something come back to council?
Mr. Hugenboss or Mr. McClatchy?
I think if the meeting turned out to be difficult or impossible to arrange, we'd have to come back to council with information that that was the result of our efforts.
So there'd be no further, I mean, we don't have a timeline for our involvement at this stage anyway, correct?
We do have a timeline that's associated with the timelines being presented by the federal government for their project. But I would hope that we would be able to have such a meeting if it was requested.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, is there any other discussion on the motion to defer? Okay, we will call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, moving on to clause 5. Proposed settlement of local planning appeal tribunal appeal 223 Princess Street. Any discussion? Okay, Councillor Stroud.
Sorry, I have a question to staff about the 5th clause and the heritage easement agreement. Has work begun on that easement agreement, and do we have any idea the kinds of conditions that are in there? Do we have that information, or is it something that's still forthcoming?
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. We've certainly started the rough draft of pulling that together, but it's our intention for that to be going as per the clause to a special meeting of Heritage Kingston to have that discussion so that we can consult the committee on some of the specifics of the details that will likely go into the heritage easement agreement. So what we have right now is just a started draft from a staff perspective, but need to ensure that we have the consultation and the comments from the committee before that can be finalized.
So thank you. And so we're all aware of the facade, the heritage facade of the old Capitol Theatre, and then that will presumably be part of the discussion. But is the Heritage Committee also, would it be in order for them? Is it part of the easement agreement to speak about the architectural details of the project and the impact on the heritage of that location? Is that also part of the discussion?
Mr. Dragon?
Yeah, thank you, and through you. So certainly, a heritage easement agreement can have a varying level of detail depending. Certainly, I would expect that Heritage Kingston would have some specific input with respect to some of the architectural details or some of the finer points. Certainly, from a staff perspective, we have the benefit of the Heritage Impact Assessment, which also makes recommendations about the Heritage Easement Agreement. But those are details that we're still working through now, and I would anticipate it would cover some of those elements for sure, Councillor Stroud.
Okay. It seems like a pretty big moment for the Heritage Committee in light of like the peer review that we had before about the impact on the heritage and all of the public comments we've had about the impact on the heritage downtown. So it just seems like that's a big special meeting and an important one. And I guess I'm just hoping that everybody's prepared to produce some good clutch work in that venue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Okay, we will call the vote then on clause 5. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's great. Okay, it is 8:58. So I'm going to propose that we take a 2-minute recess. We will come back at 9:08 and then continue on with report number 41. We'll reconvene in 10 minutes. Okay, good evening, everybody. It is 9:08, so we will reconvene. And we are now at report number 41 from Planning Committee.
Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hill, that report number 41 from the Planning Committee be received and adopted.
So there are two clauses in report 41. Would anyone like them separated? Okay, seeing none, clause 1 is approval of an application for zoning bylaw amendment 229 Green Bay Road. And clause 2, approval of an application for official plan and zoning bylaw amendment citywide. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, on to report number 42 for Kingston.
Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Osterhoff, that report number 42 from Heritage Kingston be received and adopted.
Okay, so there are essentially 3 sections of the report. So I think we'll need to deal with number 3 separately because it's a motion from the committee. So first we will deal with all the approvals under section 1 and 2. If nobody wants any of those separated, we will call vote on 1 and 2. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, so now we will deal with number 3, reconsideration of application fee for heritage alteration permits. Any discussion? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Just to give a bit of background, when this was brought to Heritage Committee, staff explained that the funds that these fees, first of all, we already voted to approve the fees, and they're $300 for per application. And when and this was brought up at Heritage Committee meeting, and staff explained that the reason behind the introduction of a heritage fee is so that we can hire a heritage planner. So that was the rationale behind it. But it did cause a lot of discussion, not just during the Heritage Committee meeting, but also from the community, and concerns that heritage properties are already extremely costly to repair. And so I have a couple of questions, I guess, for staff to begin with. And the first question is, how many heritage applications are we talking per year?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Patterson. So on average, when we were doing this work associated with the 2021 budget, I looked at what's about a 10-year average for heritage applications, and it's around 100 per year. In the last few years, we've exceeded that, but on average, it's about 100 per year.
Thanks. So that's about $30,000, and which is not a huge sum when we're talking about paying for staff and hiring a new planner. The application fee is also just across the board for any application, correct? So if somebody does fairly minor type of work, they would still have to pay the $300.
Mr. Aggie?
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor Patterson. So yes, the fee that we introduced for 2021 is a flat rate of $300 associated with any permit. Certainly, we've received some feedback asking us to look at a sliding scale in future years, which we've committed to do as part of the 2022 budget. But for the purposes of 2021, given the fact that we were in a pandemic, looking at creating a fee that was similar to what we have for pre-application, which is also $300 for planning applications, and then thinking about during a time when we were facing a deficit, how we would be able to look at increasing our staff complement to put more dedicated resources to the heritage portfolio. We introduced that fee as part of the fee schedule that went to council in November of 2020.
And thanks. How many times, so one of the frustrations since I've been on the Heritage Committee is that people go ahead and do work on their properties without following the due process. How many times do we find people when they actually go ahead without putting a permit through the proper systems and following the process?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Patterson. Certainly, I wouldn't say the city has a track record of doing a lot of aggressive enforcement related to heritage matters. It's something that we've definitely been hearing from Heritage Kingston and the community, a stronger desire to see that going forward. As part of some of the work that we introduced in 2020 with respect to the administrative monetary penalties, and we introduced those as part of some of the COVID enforcement, we're looking at the opportunity to expand that tool to potentially include any type of heritage violations as well, so that we would have an easier path with respect to enforcement as a preliminary tool rather than going through the court system, which can take a long time and be actually very expensive. So that's part of what we're thinking about going forward, but certainly there wouldn't be a very large number of properties that I've been aware of in the time that I've worked for the city that have gone through a type of prosecution related to a heritage infraction.
So I can ask a few more questions? Thanks. Does it have to be a prosecution? Can it not just be a bylaw fine, like a half decent fine? Like, it seems to me, I certainly understand. I think it would be really good if we could hire another planner. 30,000 though is not the overall budget of the city. We're not talking a huge amount for the city, but $300 added to the already extra cost for our heritage alterations is a lot of money for individuals. So really the people following the right process are kind of getting fined, paying the $300, but the other people who are not following the process are not. So, but you say you use strong language like prosecution, but can bylaw officers not fine people without huge prosecutions involved?
Commissioner Reagan?
Thank you, through you. And that's certainly something that that we're looking at through the administrative monetary penalties to see if that's a possibility. There's some research that we needed to do to look at whether or not we could administer that under the Municipal Act, which is the same thing that we're doing for COVID-related fines. So tickets being issued, immediate fines being issued, which is similar to what you're asking for, Councillor Doherty. What we're trying to get some clarification on is whether or not we can utilize that tool, which takes its power under the Municipal Act versus infractions that are happening under the Heritage Act. And there's specific processes that are laid out with respect to that legislation as to how it can be enforced. So we are looking at opportunities to expand that, but it is something that we have to do carefully to make sure that we're administering the authority that we have properly. And certainly I wouldn't expect that it would be any type of fine system would be generating large amounts of money for the municipality, because generally we find people to be quite compliant, but certainly there are some people from time to time that go ahead and do work on a property without obtaining permission, but it's not a large number on an annual basis.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Doherty, did you have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, like I stated at the beginning, it would be good to have an additional planner. I think the 30,000 for us can be found. Certainly, some of it can be found through finding people who do not follow due process. But $300 is a concern. So I really support what the reconsideration, and that perhaps staff could bring something back to council, including a sliding scale, because if somebody has some kind of alterations that are just a couple of $1,000 and they have to pay $300 to add to that, where the concern that I have is, one is that we're penalizing people for doing the right thing. Two is we adding to the cost, and maybe then people will reconsider and maybe not do the alterations and the repair that is needed to properties. So Yeah, so I will support the recommendation that's in front of us by Heritage Kingston. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next, Councillor Hutchison. Did I see your hand earlier? I think you're next on my list.
Thank you. So what I took from what Commissioner Agnew said was that in general, non-compliance is not really a problem. Is that a fair conclusion? I'm asking
Mr. Agnew.
Thank you. And through you, like I said, we don't see a large number of properties that are in non-compliance each year. There are certainly some, but it's not a large number.
So in this motion, unfortunately, I can't speak and look at it to be absolutely sure. At the same time, is this, when it says reconsider, is that a request for review, or is it some kind of commitment by council?
So, Councillor Hutchison, I'm going to answer that question.
Sure.
So this is a motion that was passed by Heritage Kingston that is requesting us to reconsider the fee. So if council was to pass this motion, then the expectation would be that a member of council would bring a formal motion of reconsideration to council. So that does require a 2/3 majority to pass. The only reason, the advantage to discussing this right now is the council will know that the rules around a motion to reconsider are quite strict. There's generally only the mover and the seconder that have a chance to speak to it. So this effectively is a way to have a discussion beforehand. So this discussion can allow us to ask questions of staff and to have that discussion, but ultimately it's up to council to formalize a motion of reconsideration if this motion passes.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. It doesn't happen often, I gotta say, in this format. So, is it fair to say that permit fees are generally meant to pay for the cost of processing, or at least abate the overall cost of the staff and the staffing and the work that goes into the permit process?
Dragon.
Thank you, and through you. Certainly I can't speak to all fees across the city, but with respect to the fees that we have in place for the planning department in particular, and what we are looking at with respect to the heritage fee that was introduced. On the planning side, we strive to be about 50% cost recovery. There's about 50% of fees that are funded from the tax base. And I think that's historically been the case, given the sense that there's always a sense of public benefit that comes from the creation of new housing and commercial amenities in the community. The same type of thought process went into the creation of a fee related to heritage permits. It wouldn't be doing 50% cost recovery across the board, but it would be representing maybe 25 or 30%. The rest would still be funded from the tax base that comes through our budget. From the heritage perspective, there's very minimal opportunity to create any revenue opportunity for the department. So as we look to try to grow a staff and create additional resources, we have to find ways to try to facilitate that within the confines of the budget parameters that are established for us. So that's where the fee came from as a portion of cost recovery, but certainly a smaller portion relative to the overall cost when you factor in all of the staff time that goes into the permitting process.
So in this instance, in this case with the heritage permit, do we know, you said that we raised about $30,000 and that represents about 20 to 30% of the total cost. Would that be fair? To run the heritage permit process for a year. So really $90,000 to $100,000, roughly.
Thank you, and through you. So what we did put in the budget was a revenue estimate of $30,000. And that was looking at what we'd historically seen as about 100 permits per year at $300 an application. So I put that as a projected revenue line in the 2021 budget that was presented to council. But again, on the cost recovery, the $300 for smaller permits, that might represent more of like a 50% cost recovery. But certainly when we get into more complex applications that involve a lot of additional detailed review and multiple times, sometimes at committee, there's a lot more staff hours that go into those types of complex applications. So all applications are not the same in that respect.
Right. Okay, but it does sound like to run the heritage permit system based on the numbers you gave us, we're talking $100,000 a year. Because 30% is 30,000. 3 times that is 90, not quite. Is that a reasonable rough estimate?
I would have to go back and look at the numbers. So if you're looking at the total costs associated with the 2 heritage planners that we have right now, plus a third, looking at their salaries plus benefits, it would be a lot more than $100,000 for sure, Counselor, but they're also doing other work like Part 4 designations and policy work in addition to the heritage permit work that they do as well.
So I hate to belabor this, but what I'm getting at is this cost has got to come out of somewhere, and somebody has to pay it. And I'm not sure $300 is really all that much, especially if we apply a sliding scale, which we might, which I'd be open to myself. So if we pass this motion, will you be doing at least some of that re-examination of the allotment of costs and coming back to council with your findings? Is that what I can expect from this motion?
So Councillor Hutchison, just to jump in there, so there's no staff action that would happen until council passes a motion of reconsideration, and then you can either direct staff at that point. So just want to make that clear. Passing this motion isn't going to do that.
I get that. The point is, when I'm assuming there's going to be a report from the planning department about the effects of this motion. And that's what I'm concerned about. So if we vote for reconsideration, we're not going to set the amount that night, right? We're going to get a report and then we'll set it.
Okay, so Councillor Hutchison, so if council passes this motion tonight, let's suppose at our next council meeting, then a motion of reconsideration comes forward. Let's suppose that passes. Then essentially reopens that piece of the budget. And at that point, council could do any number of things. They could change the amount, or they want more information from staff, then they could defer at that point to staff or ask for more information. There's any number of actions that council could take, but only once the motion of reconsideration passes.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor Neal.
Thank you. I'm very supportive of this. I was on Heritage Committee for a while, and I agree with Councillor Doherty. This is a disincentive for us having people either wishing to declare their house as a heritage site or seeking some kind of a proper revitalization. I think there'll be a lot more behind closed doors things happening in heritage. And I just want to remind people that Kingston was the first community to declare a heritage site. heritage policy, and the Ontario government at the time actually drew upon what Kingston had done in order to draw up the provincial regulations. We, as a community, are known as very positive heritage community, and much of our tourism and other aspects are successful because people recognize us as a heritage community. And I think anything that disincentivizes either the declaring, seeking heritage status, or doing the appropriate thing is, I think, counterproductive. So I will support this recommendation from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Patterson, and I appreciate the discussion as well. I was not at the Heritage meeting, and so I didn't get to have my say there, and I knew it was coming, and I actually see it a little bit differently than Councillor, although I appreciate Doherty's comments, because I thought she asked the good questions, and then at the end, said she doesn't support it, and so though I agree that we have a lot to be proud of as a heritage community, I think that I don't see it, and I respectfully, all the people that wrote letters, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think the evidence is there to support that. And I think that it's important to the taxpaying community that everyone pays their share. And we know that when we purchase heritage homes, we know when we purchase homes that are fixer-uppers, or, everyone else pays their share. And it's only a portion of it, as Commissioner Agnew has shared. And I think that we should applaud when we try to have some cost recovery. We are in a pandemic, and we all know that we all have to pay our way, and there's enough shortages throughout the budget everywhere we go that this is a fair permit. There is the value added by these permits into those who have heritage homes is substantial. They're phenomenal planners. They guide along. I really enjoy being on heritage, actually, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm impressed by the planning community that contributes to something happening well. So the fact that we already as taxpayers pay 75% of that is something that shows our commitment as a city where innovation and history thrive. So I think that I just can't support it myself, though I really respect both views. And I mean, if we choose tonight to do that, we can still have the discussion. I guess that's what you're trying to say, Mayor Patterson, to Councillor Hutchison. I guess I'm all for having discussion as well, but I think that I can't support that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to all my colleagues who weighed in on this. And I think before we make our decision, we have to acknowledge exactly where we are. And it does go back to, as Councillor Neal mentioned, the origins of the Heritage Act in 1980. So Kingston has this pride in our heritage, and we were doing something back then. We came up with a framework, and the province liked it, and they came up with the Heritage Act, sort of modeled on it, as Councillor Neal said. But why was that done? That was done because those that understood the value of those heritage buildings and fought for them and advocated for them, they made enough sense at the time to convince, not only here in the city, but provincially, that heritage was worth protecting, that it had a value of its own, that it's intrinsically valuable. And it definitely that is true here in Kingston. I mean, of anywhere in Ontario, it's probably most true in Kingston, which is maybe why it started here. But that point gets forgotten over and over and over with this kind of discussion. We're forgetting that how valuable that heritage is. You know, we're proud to say a lot of things about Kingston, but Kingston wouldn't be Kingston without the heritage buildings. And without the heritage protections, we'd have a lot less left that we have right now. And even just last year, we lost another building. You know, so disincentive, as Councillor Neal said, is a huge concern. And I agree with what Councillor Ostroff was saying about being fair and how the taxpayer expects everybody to pay their share. That's absolutely true. And I think equitability there is crucial. So really, bottom line, we need to come up with something other than a flat $300 fee, right? That was a great starting point for the conversation. The point about maybe there being a fee for that expertise from the heritage planners is a good idea. But if there's not lots of heritage grants, and if there's not, like, if most of it isn't covered by other means, and it just becomes an extra fee that you pay, it definitely becomes a disincentive, and it contributes to the decline and loss of more heritage buildings, which is far more valuable to us than the $300. I'm sorry. So it's not that we don't want people to pay their share, it's that we have committed to protect what makes us special, and that comes at a cost. Do we spread that cost across all the taxpayers and cover everything and have no fee? Or do we have a sliding scale kind of fee, as has already been mentioned? I think that's probably a really good thing to examine. That's not what we have right now because of what we passed in November. What we have is a flat $300 fee, which will incentivize illegal heritage applications for minor stuff. It'll contribute to the loss of heritage windows, the loss of small heritage details, because they will go unnoticed. And we don't know actually how much is happening right now, because a lot of it goes unreported. It only goes by complaint. So rather than mess with all that and risk losing heritage for $300 individual fees, we need to have a discussion about how to recoup some of that cost. What is the heritage grant situation? What can we get from the federal government and so on? Can we maybe increase revenues from the higher levels of government to protect heritage, and what that looks like? So all of that requires us to reconsider, because right now we've got a flat fee. So you may partially agree with Councillor Osterhoff, but that doesn't mean you don't reconsider. It means that you're willing to have a discussion about what the fees should be, whether it should be a sliding scale, and whether we can get revenues from other sources. So I do support this motion from the Heritage. I have nothing to do with the committee at the moment, but I do understand the issues, having been chair for 4 years. And I do encourage all of you to support this and to be willing to have a discussion without any foregone conclusions about what we should be doing to both incentivize the protection of heritage or not disincentivize it, and also increase revenues to try to achieve some kind of cost recovery, because it is time-consuming work. Unfortunately, a lot of that it comes from the very nature of protecting heritage. It is costly.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Next is Councillor Bone.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, just listening to all the conversations here, it seems like everybody's made some very good points. We don't want to disincentivize heritage caretakers or people who are willing to put their money forward. On one hand, on the other hand, if you own a heritage property and $300 is going to make or break the bank, then it's like, so I see both sides of it. I do think that Councillor Stroud hit on a key theme there, which is we need to come up with some type of sliding scale. So just a quick question to staff, I guess. If we were to hypothetically reconsider this and pause or do away with the 300, what could that reconsideration look like, and how much time would be needed to sort of come up with that sliding scale. I heard a little bit before about COVID and limited resources. Is this something where like we're talking a long time, or could we just say, you know, up to $10,000, 100, up to 50,000, 200, and then 50 beyond is 300? Is something quick and easy like that possible?
Thank you, and through you. So certainly, you know, we can do some pretty rudimentary calculations that look at different types of applications and level of effort to get a better sense of what a sliding scale could be for something that's more of a delegated authority item that is done at the staff level versus a minor application that still has to go through Heritage Kingston versus a major application that involves, you know, a lot of time and effort and maybe have multiple trips to the committee. What I did want to offer, just for clarity for council's sake, is that part of the discussion with Heritage Kingston was that, as council knows, you approve the fees on an annual basis. So this matter will be back before you no matter what in November when the 2022 fee report comes. And my department has already committed to doing the work that you're talking about now and looking at more of a varied fee schedule going forward. So it's a matter of whether or not it's essential to council that happen within the next, like the remaining 8 months of the year, or whether council's okay to leave it the way that it is right now and then receive some different information with some options going into the next budget that would have more consideration of the sliding scale like we're talking about tonight.
And thank you, Commissioner Agnew. So it sounds like we basically have the options before us that everybody's looking for and discussing. It's just a matter of, do we want to try and reconsider this and have a rush job, or do we want to wait the 7 or 8 months and then have the public input and all the discussion we've had here tonight built into the recommendation that's going to come back when the fee schedule comes back before us in 8 months? So, I mean, with that being said, I don't want to rush the decision. So, I mean, it's being reconsidered one way or the other. I think we're just kind of debating whether we want it in 3 months or 8 months. And it sounds like we're going to get a better product if we wait the full 8 months to better understand and give your staff time, which, let's not forget, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So, I mean, there are a lot of other priorities there. So with that being said, it's not that I'm against having the conversation. I just believe that the motion to reconsider right now is asking us to do something which is naturally going to occur anyways. So with that being said, I'm going to vote against the motion to reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak? Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Worship. Councillor Bohm has noted a few things that I was going to address, mostly that, as Commissioner Agnew has mentioned, the process of setting fees is not something that we tend to do in this way, and that setting, sort of spending the time now talking about incentives versus disincentives to ensure heritage work is completed. We don't have those conversations about incentives versus disincentives for someone to go and spend nearly $600 to use Artillery Park. So I think those conversations are best had at the staff level, and recommendations come forward, and then we decide at that time. And if we allow that to happen, we can review all of those options at a later date. I really don't think it's, again, maybe this is not a great analogy, but I don't think that we're saying that we don't value heritage by ensuring that there is some cost recovery. Similar to the fees charged at Artillery Park, it is about cost recovery. It's not that we don't value people having physical activity. So I think I certainly will not be supporting reconsideration, and do hope to see the results of these conversations more consistent with other fees that we look at as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion? Okay, we will call the vote then on clause 3 of the Heritage Kingston report. All those in favor? Opposed? And that loses. Okay. Moving on to report number 43 from Planning Committee.
Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hill, that report number 43 from the Planning Committee be received and adopted.
So there's just the one clause, approval of an application for official plan amendment citywide. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay. So moving on, we have nothing from Committee of the Whole. We have I'm sorry. We do have one information report. Proposed amendments to Kingston Economic Development Corporation corporate bylaw. Okay, any questions? Councillor Sam.
Thank you, Your Worship. My only question is, I don't understand why it's an information report. So we have no control to vote on it. It is why don't we have? I've never sat on KEDCO. So how come we're not voting on it? Why is it just an FYI?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. McLeod may also want to jump into this one, but the Kingston Economic Development it's a separate organization, the same way that Tourism Kingston is a separate organization. So they have their own bylaws to govern their organization, and they do have the ability to make changes to their bylaws. They do not require council approval to change their bylaws, but they do require, obviously, approval at their AGM. We wanted to make sure that council was aware because there are changes in here that will impact the way that selections take place with the nominations committee. So we felt that it was important for council to be informed before those changes are finalized at the AGM.
Other questions? Councillor Neal.
Yes. I find this a little bit frustrating because this will be the only, this will be an organization that depends heavily upon city funding, and we have no say in the selection, which has always been part of the process in the past.
I'm giving you some preamble as long as you arrive at a question.
I am arriving at a question.
Okay.
So is our only control over KEDCO now going to be at budget, which I would suggest may be a dangerous situation, but is that an accurate statement?
Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. The relationship City Council and the corporation the city has with the various agencies, board and commission differs. And historically, KEDCO has been one which the City Council does not serve as member or shareholder, unlike other corporations. The rules in terms of picking the directors have changed from time to time, but the key relationship we have as it's organized now, and organized now will be more so in the future, is, as you say, Councillor Neal, through the budget process. It is a process which will come up on an annual basis. And CEO Hurdle can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in December 2020, we entered into an agreement with KEDCO that has a discussion of service levels and annual budget confirmations. And that is, I believe, a 5-year contract that covers the topics of what they will do and what budget will be allocated. So that contract also has a termination clause. So it is built to be managed through that agreement at this point in time. But yes, council never, as far as I understand, and certainly not in more than 10 years, has served as either member or shareholder with that kind of corporate oversight function that we see with other corporations.
Follow-up question, if I might. You're suggesting a 5-year budgetary commitment is being made or will be made. Is that accurate? And if
Sorry,
that's-
Councillor, I'll clarify my understanding is we
Please
have
do.
a 5-year agreement which has an annual budgetary process involved.
Okay.
So that it's a structure. It isn't a commitment, put it that way.
Okay. Thank you. You had me, you rattled my chain there a little bit, mentioning a 5-year process. Thank you.
Okay, next I see Deputy Mayor Hill.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to phrase this as a question. But just to Mr. McLeod's comments, we will continue to have 4 representatives from council on the board of directors for KEDCO. Is that correct?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, that's actually something I was trying to jump in earlier to mention. Yes, the representation will continue to stay as 4 members of council.
So presumably that council's interests would be represented by those councillors then, correct? Just as it always has been.
That's
Thank you.
Rhetorical question, but CEO Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So obviously the intent is always to have, council representing obviously city and council interests when they do sit on these boards.
Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a number of questions with regard to this proposal. Of the council members on the KEDCO board, who was in attendance at the December 21st meeting of 2020 when this item was discussed?
CEO Hurdle.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Mayor, I honestly do not have the list of attendees of the December 20, I think you mentioned December 20th, Councillor Chappelle.
It says in the minutes of 21st of December, this bylaw was brought forward to the board.
I believe it was brought forward for discussion, but I do not have the list of attendees from that meeting.
I'm only interested in if the mayor and the other members of council were in attendance.
So Ms. Gillespie, I believe, is as well. Ms. Gillespie, are you able to confirm attendance?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Patterson. Our board minutes are online, and I believe that in attendance December 21st was Councillor Oosterhoff, Councillor Hill, and the mayor. There were regrets from Councillor Bowe.
Okay. Of the current board, how many are termed out next year, or how many are up for replacement next year of the current board?
Through you, Mayor Patterson, I may need a moment to look at the list to get an accurate answer for you, Councillor Chappelle. I don't have that at the tip of my fingers.
Okay, I'll go on to my additional question. What was the premise behind the wording for the removal of a councillor off the committee? This committee seems to have a significant amount of latitude to remove a city councillor who was appointed by council to sit on the board of KEDCO.
Through you, Mayor Patterson, I believe that recommendation came from having consistent language, the way the board would treat directors at large. And looking at the way Tourism Kingston bylaws were structured to, again, keep consistent language.
Okay, I have some consternation with that notion because there might be a situation where a councillor raises a concern and then it is deemed to, anyways. I think there should be a different perspective for councillors, but that's just my own opinion. I do think that overall, the premise behind this, we're not voting on this. This is a notice of information. Is that correct?
So, Councillor Chappelle, I'm giving you preamble. You have to.
My question is simply,
we are not voting on this tonight. This is just a report.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And what will happen is that the nominations committee will no longer be involved in the selection of members for KEDCO. So the public at large does not have an opportunity to present their application for KEDCO. Is that correct?
Who would like to answer that? Ms. Waters.
Hello, through you, Mayor Patterson. We have a nominations process that we've been following some years. The City Nominations Committee was an additional step to that. So yes, you're quite right, Councillor Chappelle, that we would have a different process where people would apply directly to the board. Important to remember that 3 city councillors and the mayor sit on that board, and that our HR nominations committee also has a member of council that sits on that. So the entire board comes together when we have a vacancy, looks at the skills gap that we might have, very much focused on our shared mandate of the integrated economic development strategy, and then decides what sort of skills we're looking for. And when the call goes out for a vacancy, that's what we look for in those applicants. We shortlist it, the HR nominations committee shortlists, and then they bring to the board their shortlist. And we have some really robust discussion before we make our decisions. So it's a very thorough, robust process. And it just basically allows us the flexibility to look at the skill set that we need to move forward with our mandate.
This last year, there was a lot of criticism on the selection for the members by the committee from the nominations committee, and then having a redo. And my question is, will there be consideration for gender parity, ethnic diversity, cultural sensitivities in your selection process? Because that was one of the criticisms of the committee's work last term.
Absolutely. It's going to be a very important part of what we look for as we fill vacancies on the board. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Waters.
Okay, are there any other questions? Councillor Stroud.
Question to any of the EDO representatives here present. So at that discussion, when this resolution was passed that we're learning of now, in reference to what Councillor Chappelle was just talking about the last nominations process that happened for this last year, that will no longer happen as things will no longer be coming to nominations. Was there any reference to in the discussion when the HR committee made this recommendation about the difficulties described by Councillor Chappelle with the last nominations process at the City Nominations Committee?
When,
oh yeah, Ms. Waters,
sorry, I apologize. For you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Stroud, the nominations that were presented by the Kingston FDEV board to the nominations committee were two of them. I might have Donna to help me here. 2 were returning directors whose terms, who had another term to serve. And 2 were women. And so I don't think the issue with gender parity or any of those concerns were with our recommendations.
No, I think you must have misunderstood. I didn't state it. I didn't state my question clearly enough. I'll try again. The nominations committee made recommendations. There was consternation both in the community and presumably at the board. And the request came back to have, through one of your directors that sits on council, to have another process to vote again on the nominees. So basically the redo that Councillor Chappelle was talking about. The fact that that happened, was that discussed? Was that part of the rationale that was behind the recommendation from the HR committee to change the structure?
Again, through your Mayor Patterson, certainly that caused some discussion at the board level, because again, when we have a robust process where we're looking at trying to recruit specific skill sets, the people around that table, when we meet, understand where we're going and what we already have around the table. So it's very difficult for an outside committee to have that information and to make similar decisions. So I think it was just a realization that there was a bit of a disconnect between the two, with our recommendations and the committee's decisions. And then we sort of looked at, okay, how can we make this process more fluid, more flexible for the organization to recruit the skill sets that we need to move our mandate forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes. My final question is, in those same discussions, both at the HR committee and at the board when they made the recommendations, would you say there is a clear understanding of the democratic cost of having this new process and not having the elected city representatives making those decisions through the nominations committee, like the city nominations committee? Was that sacrifice, the democratic sacrifice, discussed at all?
I think that what was discussed was that the city directors helping to make those decisions are the ones that would be sitting around the board table and understanding the organization from the inside. So that again, there's the democratic function, as you're pointing out, is very much part of the reason that we have 1/3 of our active voting members, city council. And again, we've added to our HR nominations committee the requirement that a councillor be part of that as well. And that there is no quorum without city representation in any of these meetings.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I saw one other hand, or maybe not. Was there anybody else that has any questions? Yes, Councillor Hodgson, go ahead.
I suppose Councillor Stroud sort of asked this question, but as a member of a not-for-profit, an employee, would you not agree that it's best not to tick off one's main funder?
Sorry, Councillor Hutchison, was that question to me?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it's absolutely not the best way to approach a funder. But that's not our intent. I mean, we really feel that we have strong alignment with council. The integrated economic development strategy is a shared mandate, a shared goal. As I've already stated, we have city representation on the board and in all our subcommittees, including the HR nominations committee. So it's certainly not our intent to upset our main funder. And I'm hoping that that won't be the outcome of this.
No, I'm sure. I'm trying to think how to make this a question. We are only allowed to ask questions, right, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, so the rules around information reports are questions only, but as
Right.
you'll see, I do
So-
give some limited preamble.
Right. So I think that's an error on the part of who decided that. Okay. And I think that I think KEDCO is going to live to regret this. Twice in the time.
Don't-
I've been on council.
You've got to circle back to a question, though. That's not a question.
Well, does history suggest that KEDCO should be allowed to have more leeway than it already has?
Was that a question to Councillor Hutchison?
Yes. Okay, so that's my question. History suggests in the last, say, 15 years that KEDCO should be allowed more leeway than they have already got.
That's a tough one to answer. First of all, we're not the organization we were 15 years ago, and those legacy issues, I believe, have been laid to rest. The point of this is simply to, by removing ourselves from the nomination, the city nominations committee process is just efficient governance. And it's not in any way intended to create more leeway. It's simply allowing us to do our job and to move the organization forward with the flexibility we need to have the board skills that are required to move our mandate forward. That's the only reason for this.
I appreciate that as a motive. But is it not true that even pro-business councillors have said, and it wasn't me, I'm not anti-business or pro-business one way or the other, but is it not true that pro-business councillors recommended in the, was it the last council or the one before, that the business of KEDCO be brought in-house? Anybody?
That's a bit far off this report, Councillor Hutchison.
Oh, I don't think so. That's my point here.
Well,
you know,
I'm not seeing anyone jump to answer that question, so I think we'll just leave it.
Well, the answer is yes. Okay. So I'm.
In your procedural rules, you could ask a question. I don't think you're allowed to answer your own questions. I think that could open up a bit of a Pandora's box for us.
Then,
so I'll let that one go.
With great humility, I apologize for pointing.
No, it's okay.
So
any other questions?
I would be extremely careful about passing this if I were KEDCO. Because I don't.
Okay. So
is it not true? Is it not true? Question. Is it not true that no, I think I made my point. Okay.
Okay.
Lots of luck.
Okay. Thanks. I'll move on next to Councillor Bowman.
Your worship, and through you, I guess this would be a question to KEDCO staff. And it actually follows up a little bit with what I believe Councillor Hutchison was trying to get to. And I do completely understand the intent, which was to streamline the process and attempt to fill gaps in expertise that may exist on the board when other board members leave due to their term expiring. I guess my question then would be is, we are going to get comments and questions and probably some outrage from community members when we hear about this, depending on how it appears in the media. So whom should we point those people to when they inevitably come to us asking those hard questions of how did we arrive here? And depending on the spin that's put on it, it could be perceived that it's now turning into a lack of oversight when the community is probably more aware of ever that they want increased oversight. So how would you answer that? To whom should we kind of redirect these inquiries? And, or is there a template that can be provided so that we can just to push this out as well, because inevitably, especially with some of the history, which a lot of the community has not forgotten, these inquiries are going to come hard and fast once this hits the mainstream.
Ms. Gillespie.
Answer, Mayor Patterson, through you. I would be happy for any councillor or city staff to direct inquiries directly to myself, either by email or my cell phone number. And then I can triage them, as some individuals may want to speak to the volunteer board chair or other members of the board. But I would be happy to be the first point of contact to help answer or to triage.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I guess in that explanation would be the understanding and the explicit point that it's not something that council really endorsed or / controlled. It was actually coming from the KEDCO board itself, correct?
Correct. So through you, Mayor Patterson, this would be a board of directors decision that would be made at an all members meeting at our upcoming AGM. And we can explain that this was in alignment with the way other entities such as Tourism Kingston are established, and that we do still maintain 3 council directors and the mayor as full voting members, and that we increased the presence of council on our nominations committee to represent city council in terms of nomination process.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Yeah, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I understand what you're trying to achieve. It makes sense, and you know best what skills need to be around the table. So I do appreciate that. My question is about, and I know you've already answered this, and I'm not sure if I understand it. How did this come to be just an information only report? Like how come we were, what about the democratic process, and how could it be that we were shut out in this particular discussion? Like it's an information only, we can only ask questions, we can't really have a discussion around this, but as Councillor Hutchison correctly stated, we will get a lot of questions on this. So it seems somehow wrong that this is just an information only policy, when in fact, so KEDCO decided to shut out a city process without councillors having a discussion around it.
Let's see over.
Thank you, and through Mr. Mayor. So Mr. McLeod may want to jump in here as well, but just from a procedural perspective, Councillor Dorothy, the KEDCO has the ability to amend its own bylaw, and it does not require council's approval, council as a whole. Having said that, there are obviously members of council that do sit on the board that are involved in those conversations. But that's why you're receiving this tonight as an information report, so that at least council as a whole is aware of these changes before they are finalized. And that was the intent in terms of bringing that information. Not sure if Mr. McLeod wanted to add anything to that.
Mr. McLeod?
I would just add or clarify again, that's the result of City Council not being the membership or the shareholder of this corporation. So the unlike many of the other corporations involved with the city, this one doesn't have council oversight in the same way that the AGM sits at a council meeting and council votes to approve things done by boards of directors. In this case, this corporation, that is managed separately.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next is Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. I'm going to say something that might not be too popular among councillors, but I do believe that part of the problem here was the nominations committee of the city was a little dysfunctional on some of these files in the last little while. And I can see why I would want to remove them, because in many cases they weren't looking at it. So I do have 2 questions, and I'm having a little bit of a preamble, if that's all right with you. So there is a certain weakness, and we all recognize that when we pass the motion to look at that. to look at our nominations committee and reconsider how to do that better. So,
so Councillor Chabelle, point of order.
Considering,
Councillor McLaren, I'm just going to put you on pause. Councillor Chabelle, you had a point of order.
Yes, Your Worship. I take offense to the insinuation that there was a malice in the committee's approach. The committee was disappointed that we didn't have choice to choose from in the way it was presented. So I take offense to that. We were not dysfunctional. We took our job very seriously.
Thank you. So
you should probably listen
whoa. Okay, so I am the chair. So first of all, my ruling, that's not a point of order. That would be a point of privilege if you felt that there was something that was speaking to motive or was otherwise said that was edible. So, so I didn't see anything that Councillor McLaren had said that crossed that line, but I will just say to Councillor McLaren, please just be careful in your comments. Again, to be professional and not to speak in motive against the nomination committee or any other member of council. Councillor McLaren, you can continue your question. I have given you a fair bit of preamble already, so I'm going to ask.
So, point of privilege. I was recently just accused of issuing malice. So that speaks to motive, and I would suggest that that reflects totally on all of council.
No. So it's a point of privilege is fine to raise a point, and you can't call a point of privilege based on somebody else calling a point of privilege. So effectively canceled out. Councillor McLaren, we'll ask you to get to a question, please.
Thank you. So as I was saying, I think that we are working on the weak link on our side. May I ask, KEDCO, the Economic Development Corporation was reviewed 15 years ago and 5 years ago as well. Do you believe that you may have learned from the mistakes of the past?
Through you, Mayor Patterson, and I will defer to my board chair, Jillian. I can say we went through a very thorough review in terms of operations and governance in 2016. I believe you were chair of that process, actually, Councillor McLaren. I believe we completely changed the organization in a positive way in terms of the structure, the budget allocation. Certainly the integrated economic development strategy is a strong point forward, and entering into our second service level agreement that's even more refined and more clear in terms of deliverables and return on investment for municipal dollars. So I would say yes. Jillian?
Yeah, I wouldn't have much to add to that other than to say that internally the processes are also stringent and transparent. We have a very strong finance committee. Everything is, has a lot of oversight, and probably more than I've ever seen in any organization that I've had the privilege to be a board member of. So I think we've learned a great deal. But more than the learning, we've used that to move ourselves forward and become a very vibrant organization that's future focused.
Thank you. And from what I've read and seen, it seems to me that you do have a very robust recruitment process for board members. Going into the future, should the nominations committee ever become as robust as your process is, would you be willing to come back and let us help you with that?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I certainly would have to mull that one over. Come back to the fold, is that what you're saying, Councillor McLaren? I'm not sure. But I think we just feel like it's an additional step that's not necessary to the efficient running of an organization like ours.
On that, I totally agree. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we will move on. We have no other information reports. We have no information reports from members of council. Miscellaneous business. We have two motions. First, moved by Councillor Senek, seconded by Councillor Doherty. That is requested by Marianne Gagnon, Save Your Skin Foundation. Council proclaimed May 2021 as Melanoma and Skin Cancer Awareness Month in Kingston. Number two, moved by Councillor Hutchison, seconded by Councillor McLaren, that the resignation of Andrea Seprasad from the Arts Advisory Committee be received with regret. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have no new motions this evening. Are there any notices of motion? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Clerk, ask for minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Chappell, that the minutes of special City Council meeting number 8-2021 held Thursday, March 18th, 2021, and City Council meeting number 9-2021 held Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021 be confirmed.
Those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, we have some communications, tabling of documents. Is there any other business? Okay, Ms. Clerk, ask for bylaws, please.
Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Holland, that bylaws 1 through 9, 14, and 13 be given their first and second reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried.
Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Holland, that bylaws 1 through 12, 14, and 13 be given their third reading.
All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Okay, with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Bohm, seconded by Councillor McLaren. All those in favor? Opposed? And we're adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good night.